Depends how much you're attached to self, isn't it? To the ego. If you're really
Yeah.
identified as the person never wants to die. Every activity of every day is to evidence life to itself, to show that it still is. But the death industry, because after all it is an industry, from people that carry coffins every day, that go to work in immaculate black clothing every day and polish hearses every day, to my Quaker friend who, she was the registrar at the local cemetery, to the people that work in the hospice industry, to the people that are working in hospitals, particularly at this time, just seeing people leaving the body every day. It really is an everyday occurrence. Yet it's the one, it's interesting, isn't it? And it's worth looking at why it is that we give it so much power, or we allow it so much power over ourselves, because it's the inevitable appearance of impermanence. And that's the greatest fear, isn't it? If we journal right, or if we, we take life laundry, or take inventory of our life, and we get down to the root fears of separation. Separation is aloneness, or being alone. Being alone is, there's just me. What if there was no God? Then self-reliance has failed me. That stuff.
Yeah.
There's just little old me, and I'm impermanent. That's the seed in the self that's there all along. That's why, when you move into the ego stance, the first thing that generally appears with most people is rejection and abandonment, because they're two of the most savage appearances of being confronted with that very idea of aloneness and separation. Yet those things all only live in the self-concept, in the conditioned sense of being a false sense of self. But yet, in the world of finite objects, whether it's a thought, a feeling, a meal, a day, a night, a relationship, a role, a time in our lives, a place we went to, all of the things that have objective qualities that we can name and describe end. They really are all interchangeable, aren't they? These very words are overlapping each other in an effort to, they're all ending, aren't they? And this dualistic dance, this world of objects, is constantly replacing itself. It's quite exciting when you get to be the observer of the objects. But when you're just the objects, everything around you is constantly reminding you that everything ends. So then you end, don't you? For the lady that you mentioned, for the people that I mentioned that work with it every day. And I guess it's like any job when you work in potentially vulnerable situations. Unless you're of a type of person that could work in those places, like myself, who works in mental health, I don't get overwhelmed by my resident situations. All of us have worked with addicts and alcoholics in the past. We don't get overwhelmed by their situations, do we? Because if we were overwhelmed by people's situations, we wouldn't do it. I couldn't work in a kennel. It would overwhelm me 50 billion times a day, to go in and find the bodies of dogs, or, depending on where it was, dogs that would have to be put down, or, I just couldn't do it. But I can work with people. But I think that's because that part of you that has experienced similar things is able to reconcile it. Just like the gentleman I spoke about earlier with the complex relationship. Working with those people in such an intense situation, you hear all the stories, don't you?
Yeah.
And most people, again, like the younger man that I mentioned even earlier on, who's coming out of a perception of himself and his relationship to alcohol, where now he doesn't know what to do and who he is and all the stuff that he's buried is coming up. All confronted by the ending of things. It's at that point where, hopefully there's enough wisdom around us, or there's any wisdom around us that can ask us, that can support us in asking bigger questions. This is where non-duality comes, isn't it? Or where spiritual questions come, when we exhaust the world of objects, when the ego collapses, midlife crises, broken relationships. We start to ask larger questions, possibly.
Yeah.
And some of those larger questions we might call spiritual questions. Not for everyone, they might be therapeutic questions. But out of that comes questions that make us ask things beyond our finite mind, beyond our little ideas of what's true and what isn't, beyond our subjective truth, into more objective and majestic truth. And then what we ultimately discover out of that is something that never ends. That we had all along. Yeah.